Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Thursday webinar series. Today's webinar is Get Personal with Your Customers, How Sitecore's Digital Marketing System, or DMS, can change your marketing. I'm your moderator, Megan Lockwood. I'm the head of content here at eDynamic, and I'm really thrilled to be joined today by two of our top team members. First is Chet Suwanarat, who is eDynamic's Sitecore MVP and a senior Sitecore architect here, as well as Daniel Huss, who's the Director of Digital Strategy at eDynamic. With more than 70 implementations under his belt, Chet has 10 years of CMS development experience and 8 developing specifically on Sitecore. So you want to pick his brain later, ask him as many questions as you can. At eDynamic, he makes sure all of our Sitecore implementation follow best practices and really oversees the implementation. Daniel has over 11 years of experience solving business problems through digital. Dan is Google Analytics and Omniture certified, and he has frontline experience with high-growth digital agencies and strong digital project experience in all elements of that digital lifecycle, from strategy development to technology deployment and beyond. In today's presentation, we're going to cover how to use Sitecore DMS to unleash the power of personalization with your marketing and in your organization. We will have a question and answer session at the end, so please bear with us and send us your questions via the GoToWebinar chat bar, and we'll make sure to answer them immediately in real time at the end of this presentation. So without further ado, our crack Sitecore team, Chet and Daniel.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Chet Suwanarat. I would like to start with the introduction of this webinar. So in this webinar, we will discuss the introduction of the DMS and how we use DMS to do the personalization, and how we prepare to get your solution ready to use the DMS. We also will walk through some idea how to apply DMS to meet your needs. And we will go over a little bit about the implementation plan, and then walk through some examples. So what is personalization? Personalization is the way to send a specific message to an appropriate user. So without personalization, with this analogy here, it's kind of broadcasting the same message to everyone. Or you can imagine the example of a billboard on the highway, right? There are many people driving on the highway, but that billboard, let's say if the billboard is the advertising about diapers, it might not be related to everyone. It might not be related to person who are single. But with personalization, the information is more targeted. When we know each user, we know how to communicate with them with more effective message. So that means we need to know user and understand their behavior before we communicate to them. This is another example. So with personalization, let's say if you were a waitress in a restaurant, you know what your client is order. You know what entree they order. You can suggest the appropriate drink or appropriate wine that pair well with what they order. Without personalization, you kind of say the same thing to everyone, and it may or may not be effective. Okay. If we go back to the website, so content on your website sometimes is not always generic. let's walk through with this basic prototype or web template scenario. We have a basic web page with some main content on the left column, some generic links on the right column, and some generic ad under it. So this is the basic of the generic web page. Without personalization, we say the same thing to everyone. However, if we know that a web user is interested in some other drink, for example, beer, we can change the generic ad to be more specific to them. Or we can change generic link to be some other links that are related to beer. If we know that there is another web user who is a wine drinker, we may change the general link to be some links that are related to wine, and we can change the ad to be wine ad. If we know that there's a user who is a beer drinker, we will talk about how we determine that later. But if you own a liquor store and you see people walking around your liquor store, people who walk into the beer section, you know that they are looking for beer, right? If you see some other people walking in hard liquor section or wine section, do you know what they are looking for? Same thing with the website. If you can track the behavior that your site user is doing on your website, if you know what page that they are reading, you can kind of guess what they are looking for. If you see your site user clicking around articles about beer or look for information about beer, you can guess that they are a beer drinker. Then you categorize them as a beer drinker, and then once you know that, you can use DMS to change the data source or change the data, personalize each component based on who they are. Like for beer drinker, you change the general link to be beer link. You change the general ad to be beer ad. For the wine drinker, you might want to add some other component. But this is another thing that we can do. We can add or change or remove component based on who they are. And same thing, same scenario. We can change the data for the links, and we can change the data for the ad.
And Jake, correct me if I'm wrong. I think part of the reason we do this is because it's just so much more effective to add personalized experiences. I read somewhere recently that you get an 82% increase in conversion rates, for example, if you improve targeting by industry. So part of this is just that if you target a wine ad to a wine drinker, they're much more likely to click on it, right?
Correct. Correct. So let's walk through about how personalization in DMS works. A Sitecore page is made of some components. So it's not the whole page in one, but one page consists of some elements. So for example, this is the presentation detail. So in Sitecore, data and presentation are separate layers. We have data in Sitecore, and we can have another layer, the presentation layer, to define how you want data to look. So, for example, on this page, we have article component, and this component is responsible to output the main content on this page. We have related links to output some links. We have ad component to show the ad. So with the way that you can change the behavior of each component, for example, in related links control, there is a personalized button here in Sitecore. When you click on it, you can define all the rules, and the way that we change the data is done by rules engine in Sitecore. For example, we have the default rule to show if you don't meet any condition, it will fall back to the default rule. You can have user one persona, and the condition is if this current visitor match the beer preference pattern, then we show user one or beer user links. Or we can also change the condition by geography. Let's say we know if the user comes from United States, then we can personalize, change the link based on where they come from as well. So with the personalization, you can also hide the component, you can change the component, and we can change the component data like this. When we hit OK, now we notice that you see little 3 icon here. This is a notation from Sitecore. It means that this component has 3 versions of data to show, 3 conditions of data to show. With the Sitecore rules engine, we can define the rules based on criteria, and there are a lot of criteria that we are talking about. The first one is DMS profile. The way profile works is that we define profile keys, and we can give a score to a page of each key. For the profile key, for example, this can mean a job role, for example, developer or project manager or marketing person. You can put the profile key for each page, for the content on each page, saying that, okay, this page is written 100% for developer. This page is written 80% for project manager and 20% for marketing person. So each page in your Sitecore will have a score of profile key. And then when user navigates around your site, Sitecore DMS will try to build the aggregate score for each profile key. So once the score or the rule that we put in reach the score that we define, we put that user in some specific profile. Another example would be, let's say you have a product website, and there is one user looking around the product section and visit some product comparison page. Now you can kind of know this user should fall into potential buyer profile. Or if you have another user that is looking for some product technical support in another section in your website. They read some articles about product help or something like that. You can kind of guess that this might be your existing customer who bought some, product or some something from your website already and looking for a support. You can then put them into existing customer, or even more than that, if you know exactly what product that they are looking at, or product support that they are looking at, you can target more marketing by putting some ads about the newer model or the newer version of the product to them.
And
the
Chet,
next
what I think
one
is so cool about this, sorry to interrupt,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just so cool that we're able to handle this all through the back end of the system, and once it's set up in terms of, once the pages are set up from a development standpoint, and I'm specifically talking about the code level, this is all executable via the actual system itself. So with a very small learning curve, if you remember that previous slide that we were just on, you can go in and actually set this up yourself just by doing it. Is that fair to say, Chuck?
Correct. There might be some small things that involve some development if you have some customization, but with the DMS, it should work out of the box.
Fantastic.
Yep. The next one that we are looking at is the previous site or referrer. A very common example would be so when you jump from one URL to another URL on your browser, the site knows where you come from. So if you click the link, is the hyperlink from a page to a page, we know the previous page that you come from, which is site referrer. So if we know that you come from a competitor website, for example, we can display extra discount or on the sidebar or something. Or another huge benefit for this would be, let me show you, the search engine, right? So Google or Bing, let's say if I search for something, Pinot Grigio, and let's say I click this link, thefoodandwine.com. Let's say you own this website. When I go to your website, you can kind of know the URL referrer, which is this. And the huge benefit is query. We know that you come from this website because you are looking for, Grigio. That way, we can come up with a rule saying that, if we can extract some keyword search from the search engine, we get that keyword. If the keyword match the list that we have, we know, hey, okay, let's put this person into white wine drinker, for example. That is one example of using referrer. With the
and that's really powerful because we talk a lot about getting the right content to the right person at the right time, and I think having the ability, if someone comes from Google, to serve up right on your homepage an image of your latest Pinot Grigio, you're just reducing the amount of clicks and the amount of friction that it's going to take for them to order that bottle of wine from you. And I think that pertains to anything when we're talking about the web, whether or not you're selling software, professional services, whether or not you've got your own product listing. if you're able to serve that content up right on the homepage and reduce that amount of time that they need to get to what they're specifically looking for, your marketing will increase exponentially.
Yep. That would be a great example of changing the data source of the hero panel on homepage, for example. You can also do the manual classification of user. So in Sitecore, if you require user to log in and you know specific user, you can put them into some specific category, and you will treat them differently. The goal in Sitecore, so with the DMS, you can set up a goal in Sitecore. For example, if somebody fill out the form and hit submit, when you reach the thank you page, you can put in the rule saying that once people reach the thank you page, put them that, okay, they completed one goal. Or if they download a white paper or something, put them into another goal. Or if they subscribe for a newsletter, put them in another goal. So once we know that they completed the goal, we can change the website differently. So for example, if you have the link to download white paper on the right column, if they download it already, it's kind of redundant to show it again. So you can kind of swap or change the data source to be something else, maybe another white paper, or change the press release or something. The next one will be location of the user. So with DMS is already integrated with MaxMind, which is the service to detect the GeoIP and return you know where you come from, what country you're in, what city you're in. With engagement plan state, we can kind of set the engagement plan. For example, if you want people to come back to your website, you send out an email to them, but you can define all the rules and all the actions of the whole plan. You send out an email, you can track if they open up the email to read that, or you can track if they read the email and then they click the link from that email or not. If not, then maybe you wait for another week and send out another email. Or if they click the link from that email and come back to your website, did they buy your product? If not, what page that they are looking for? Or you can define the plan if you want to send out another email or send out another discount coupon or something like that about that product that they land onto. And there are so many more custom conditions that you can do with the rules engine, because Sitecore provides a rich set of the rules that you can set. So when you change the component data, we refer to the word data source. That is the terminology that developers use. So let's look at the sample content tree here. So these are pages that you have in your website, and you can have some other component. And when we say component data, they are not pages. They are just small bit of data or some chunk of the data that we want to display that on each page. So if we look at one specific page, we open up the presentation, the related link control that we talked about. The data source of these related links control may refer to some of the linked item that we have here. We can have 2 or 3 versions, and then we can swap them using personalized button here. Before we start to implement, we will have to access your website or web component. So first we will determine if the component that you have on your website can be personalized. There are some cases that we don't need the access map. For example, if you just want to hide the component or change the component, you can do that easily. Except the change in the component, it might require some configuration in Sitecore, but it doesn't have to go back to developer at all. For some cases, if you want to change the data for each component, we will have to access the component. First, we have to identify what component you want to change the data in your website, and then we check if that component is already using the data source or not, or if not, then it requires some code changing. It will have to go back. You have to go back to developer. So when we say changing the data source, if we consume the data from data source 1, we expect the component to output some data. When we change the data source to another data source item, we expect the data to display differently. So it comes to the plan of the personalization. So before the implementation, I would say we should first understand your site user and categorize them. So it comes to the work of the persona. So each persona, you should be able to answer what your user, what your audience need, and how you can interact with them, or how website can interact with them, and determine the opportunities for content targeting for each persona. And then it comes to the point that we will determine the components on each page. It doesn't mean that you will have to change the whole page based on your site user. You might want to change some, columns or some component that we saw in the example. We just changed the links and the ads on the right column. And then we will have to prepare the content for each user. Let's say you have 10 components that you want to change the data, and if you define 4 or 5 personas, it means you have to prepare like 40 or 50 versions of content altogether. Next is the way that you will categorize. You will have to come up with the rules to change the data. If not just for the persona, it might include some other things like GeoIP, or if the user comes from some specific country, display a different message or something. And then it will come to the implementation if you want to go back to developer once you get all the requirements set.
So it sounds like the overall plan, it really relates heavily to your content strategy, right? So you've got to understand that user, of course, and understanding that persona. And I think when you first kind of develop those personas, it's okay to come in and not have a completely fleshed out idea of who they are. I think it's okay to have a little bit of an educated guess. But that's got to really tie into your overall content strategy, because as you mentioned, the more personas you have, the more variations on content that you're going to have to create. Now, that doesn't always apply, right? Because you could have just reordering lists, right? When we're talking about, for example, geolocation, we could just reorder a list listing your closest offices based off of where someone is. But in other persona cases, you might want to change the way that the actual website looks and feels, or you might want to change actual copy based on where they're at. Is that fair?
Yep, that's correct. And also, I believe that if your website is currently having some analytics tool, you can start now by taking a look at the analytics data. You can kind of see the behavior of your site user and try to categorize them from the data that you have. And really, the implementation of the content personalization, it is ongoing. It keeps going. You can add a new persona anytime, or you can drop persona at any time if you don't feel it's important. So it's like putting in more logic and then test to see if that logic will work. If it doesn't work, then you drop that logic, or come up with another logic. If that works, then you kind of boost that logic more.
Right. Yeah, it's an iterative process. That makes a lot of sense.
Yep. So last section here is a little bit about the implementation tips. This might not mean anything to marketing people, but you might need to know that if you have a Sitecore website already, and before you start the personalization, you have to assess each component, right? The problem that we see a lot is if we have static placement of the component. For example, if we look at the presentation detail and we don't see this component listed here, we can kind of guess that this is static on this layout. So with the static component, you cannot change the data through personalized button. So this has to be changed to be implemented. The presentation must be dynamically bound through this panel.
I would say one of the things that I've found over time is that actually knowing how the layout and the back end is set up is critical to marketing, because first of all, I can't dream up an idea and hand it over to someone and just hope that they magically create it. And also, I think it gives you credibility when you talk to your IT team that you've actually listened to and done some homework around how to set up a Sitecore implementation.
Yep. Another example is using Sitecore fields to pull the data. I'm not saying this is a wrong way. This might be a good implementation if you don't use personalization. But so, for example, the ad and the ad image that we see here, if we recall the beer drinker ad or wine drinker ad, if we use this as a field, you cannot change the data because the way that DMS change the data is by changing the data source of the component, but not the field value. So we might have to take a look in your current implementation if you define that this information has to be changed based on user, then this will have to be extracted to be the data item so that we can pull as a data source. And the last one would be using data source and the context item. So when you request an item in, when you request a URL it refers to an item in Sitecore. And sometimes the context item is pulled automatically into your component. The way to pull the data source instead, we will have to look if your component is implemented using XSLT or sublayout. If your implementation is done by using sublayout, you can look at the code if the code is looking for the data source or not. If not, then we might have to, update the code in order to allow this component to be personalized. I'm going to pass this to Dan for the example of these scenarios.
Thank you, Chet. Yeah, and I think what I hope that we're getting out of this is that when we go ahead and think to the way that we need to implement this, I hope you guys reference this when you're using your own Sitecore implementation and go back to the way that Chet has laid out the steps and the way that we need to be approaching this from a architecture standpoint, because this could really be a resource for you. I think what I'd like to do now is take the way that that's implemented and some of the stuff that we had covered and just put it into a little bit of context. That context is going to hopefully help you understand the way and why we even want to do personalization. I'd mentioned that, getting the right content to the right person at the right time is a huge part of marketing. And that's what we're trying to accomplish. That's what we're really doing when we're talking about personalization. So I have two scenarios for you. The first is Pen Expense App. They sell premium software packages. This isn't a real company that address the most pressing problem in business, the overhead associated with replacing lost pens. I assume that everyone here, from a business standpoint, uses pens all the time, and I'm sure it costs your company millions. So they have a software product that addresses that. Pen Expense App has discovered that there are if we move ahead, three different types of personas that they could address. We have Jim, who is the information seeker. We have Susan, the decider, and Nancy, who's an existing customer of the application. So let me go into a little bit of detail really quick on this slide. Jim has just come to the site. He doesn't know a whole lot about pen expense, but he knows that he's spending a lot of money replacing a lot of pens. Susan has come to a decision that she needs and is actively searching out a resource for addressing her pen expense problems. Nancy, who already uses the software, comes to the site for other reasons. So we're going to break this down into two ways. The first, if we address Jim, we're going to take a look at his actions. As Jim is an information seeker, he's not necessarily ready to purchase, but he's heard talk among his peers about how there's a pen expense problem going on in his organization. So he's seeking out possible solutions. So he visits penexpenseapp.com. He visits the About Us page because he's trying to learn about the company. He visits the product information page where maybe it talks about the features of the product and the overall value proposition of the product. That our product has dashboards that allow you to see your monthly pen expense, that our product allows you to break out those dashboards into weekly expenses. And then he watches a demo of the actual product, that software product in use. So his actions lead us to our response. So based off of what he was doing, on what we were able to see on that page and what we know about Jim. And we didn't know anything about Jim prior to coming to the site. But our response is that we're going to show in the right rail of our website, where otherwise we might not, a newsletter sign up, because Jim falls under this information seeker, because our goal is to get him to sign up for the newsletter. Similarly, since we know that he's looking for information, we're going to prominently display, maybe again in that right rail, or maybe it's a block on the home page in our feature rotator. We adjust that feature rotator to display a product brochure download. So when he visits the site, that rotator switches from whatever its normal content is to a prompt that asks him to download our product brochure. Similarly, maybe rather than our typical copy that would just be describing our company on the home page, we're reflecting our value proposition, or maybe that's our default, since that we don't have a whole lot of information on Jim, and he is seeking information. So maybe our default is our product value proposition, that we're going to save you extensive amount of budget and bandwidth on your pens. Now the next user, of course, is going to be Susan, and Susan is a little bit further down the customer journey than Jim. If Jim is just seeking information, Susan has identified that she has a major problem with what she's spending on pens in her organization, and she is actively looking out for companies to solve this. We know that Susan has already signed up for a newsletter, and that action right there has moved her into the decider persona. That simple act of being more engaged with our website or more engaged with our brand has moved her into that decider persona in this example. We also know that she's downloaded multiple white papers from us, another indicator that she's perhaps a little bit further down the customer journey than Jim, who is still just seeking company information. Susan's actively seeking, how do I solve this problem? Information. And of course, she filled out a contact us form. So that is a pretty strong indicator that she's a little bit further down that journey, and she's actively looking for solutions because she wants someone to contact her. So how do we address that on the site? Well, since we're a software company, in that right rail, instead of a newsletter sign-up block like we showed to Jim, because she's already signed up for our newsletter, we're going to display a free trial offer. Susan, we know you're interested. We know you've already signed up for our newspaper and looked at some white papers. Why don't you engage with us with a free trial of our software and see how you like it? And seeing as she already kind of understands the value proposition of the company, let's change the copy on some of the interior pages, maybe the home pages, to reflect how easy it is to get started with our pen expense app. And now, perhaps because we've got limited bandwidth of our customer service team, until we've known that Susan is deeply interested in our product and actively seeking solutions, until that point, maybe we didn't offer online chat. But now that she is engaged, and we know that from her actions, such as signing up for that newsletter, such as downloading white papers and the contact us, let's make online chat available to Susan. Lastly, we have existing customers, Nancy. She already owns our software, so our actions to her need to be different. We need to make sure that we address that. She visits training materials. We know that she needs to get trained and understand our software. And she also downloads white papers because she's actively engaged in trying to learn about and use our software in a better way. So our response to her needs to be completely different. And it would include things. If we can move on, it would include signing up. Signing in would be the first thing on the homepage that she sees, because Pen Expense app is a software as a service, and she signs into her dashboard through the website. So rather than a newsletter sign up or a call to action to download a free trial, Nancy sees a block that says, sign in here, Nancy, we know you're a customer. Also, because we know she's looking at white papers and training materials, let's change that homepage rotator to an upsell. You're using the general version of our software. We noticed that you were interested in this white paper. Why don't you upgrade to the Pro offer of our current software? We also know that you were looking at training materials. let's advertise on the site and reflect the homepage or other calls to action to reflect, come to our training seminar. And because we know where Nancy is via geo-IP lookup, we can address the closest training seminar that might be closest to her. So in this scenario, we've got 3 different personas who are at different points in the buying life cycle. And we've addressed them in 3 different ways. I'm going to quickly go through, because I want to make sure that we have time for question and answer at the end, one more version scenario. And that's going to be Davis, 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 and Davis. They're a law firm with multiple practice areas, hundreds of lawyers worldwide, and of course multiple locations. Davis, 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 and Davis has 3 current profiles that exist. And they've been able to get this just from their, it's a very simple approach, but they have Chris, who's an executive in need of a lawyer, and he comes to varying different parts of the website. Again, we have a current customer, an existing customer who has different needs, and that would be Ann. And in the case of law firms, we have something very interesting that goes on where other law firms visit their site and try to actively engage with their attorneys. So we've got Randy, who's trying to actively poach lawyers directly from Davis, 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 and Davis. So let's start with Chris. Chris, when he comes to the website, he's reading articles on the Florida regulatory environment because Davis, 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 and Davis actively writes papers about the regulatory environment, and it just so happens that they have one on Florida. Now, we know, again, via geo-IP, that Chris is coming from Florida. And he just happened to land on our website via this link to this Florida regulatory environment article from a colleague of his because they knew it was important to him. He also, on that site, visits the regulatory practice area of that law firm. And finally, he searches for an attorney and actively looks for attorneys that are related to that practice area. So how do we respond? Because we know he's reading articles, he's visiting a specific practice area. Well, let's deliver similar articles to the ones that he was viewing. We can categorize that information, and rather than deliver most recent articles, we can deliver articles related on by his behavior, articles that he was actually viewing at that time. And it's kind of machine learning, right? Sitecore will learn based off of the taxonomy structure that we've set up that he's viewing a certain type of regulatory article that's important to him. And like I mentioned, we know he's from Florida, so let's deliver Florida-based content to him. Let's deliver events. Let's deliver those regulatory articles that are related to the environment within Florida. Finally, maybe in the right rail, let's feature the attorney or attorneys that he was looking at so that their content information is prominently displayed. Next, with our existing customers, we've got a very different approach, right? We're not trying to get them to become a lead. She's an existing customer already. However, that's not to say that she doesn't need different services that we offer. So perhaps Anne comes to our website. We have identified her as an existing customer because we can do a reverse industry lookup, and we know that she is working with a prominent accounting firm, and we know via that service which one it is. But let's say she has been engaged with a certain practice area, and she's only now engaging with a new practice area. So that's a little bit strange. She's branched off from her normal behavior, and she's now engaging with a new practice area. She's reviewing new matters, and matters in law firms are the associated cases and other papers that are associated with certain practice areas. And she downloads some new white papers. So our response to her to keep her engaged needs to be a little bit different. Our response might include things like displaying those types of new white papers that she was viewing. Let's display the related matters to the new practice areas that she is trying to view and try and cross-sell her. And this is very interesting to the law firm because we need to make sure that we're servicing her in all her needs, and we don't want to miss out on that business. And to do that, maybe now we feature contact information for that new practice area so that she can actually view it. And finally, Randy the Poacher. We know via that industry lookup that he came from a known law firm that's a competitor of ours. His action on the site, he's looking for one thing. He's looking to pull attorneys from us. So our response to Randy the Poacher needs to be, 1, we block attorneys from his view, and 2, let's update some copy to let Randy know how awesome we are and that we're better than his law firm. And that is 100% possible within the power of the DMS if set up appropriately. So I hope these two scenarios have kind of given a little bit of insight into what is possible when it comes to the DMS. And again, we're only touching on the personalization aspects of the digital marketing suite, and it can do so much more, but this personalization piece is where the internet is going. And again, I can't iterate enough, the right content in the right context at the right time. And I think that's very, very important to get across. I believe that we're going to go ahead and open the floor to questions, unless Chet or Megan, you have any other comments?
We do have a couple questions if you guys have some time. So the first question looks like it's a question about real time. Can you personalize web experiences based on what you were saying, like the geo lookup and the geo targeting, as well as past browsing behavior during a session? So can you do it in real time?
Chet, go ahead and forward that one. Chet, did you mute yourself? Well, you know, the answer is actually very simple. It is yes. Yeah. We have machine learning systems that are able to look at your actual behavior in real time, and based on what pages you're visiting, provide a score. And that score essentially is updated in real time. And Megan, like you mentioned, the fastest thing is that we're looking up where you're at. So we're able to deliver geolocation related materials to your actual location immediately. So it's very, very real time.
Yep. So based on the HTTP request, when you request for a web page from your browser, information is going to send to the server, and server will know the request comes from what IP address. With the DMS and MaxMind integrated, it takes that IP address, and MaxMind can return back if that IP address is based on what country or what city.
Great. And I think we have another question about integration. This question from Stephen is, can you integrate the Sitecore DMS with another CRM or a map platform as well?
Yes. It depends on how you would like the DMS to interact with your CRM. But in terms of using, so if we can connect to your CRM, we know your user, right? And if you categorize your user in your CRM already, we can map your categories in the CRM with the persona in the DMS, and we can display the content differently based on who they are.
I think I'd like to add too, you know, that's as Chet said, it is definitely possible to connect those. At that point, you may want to look into other personalization options. I mean, it is going to depend on your CMS. I mean, if you're using an enterprise level CMS, you know, I don't think you're going to find the personalization power that the DMS has pretty much anywhere else, but you can find some tools that will help you with your current CMS. Say if you're using something like Drupal or WordPress, there's likely to be out there some plugins that will help you with that. But again, they're just not going to be as powerful, but they're going to be free.
Great, thanks. And then the one last question that I would ask to sort of tie this all together is, if you were going to start personalization tomorrow, what's the one thing you would do for our audience? What would you start with to make this, activate this in your company?
To me, I would take a look at the analytics data if you have. If not, then we will have to come up with the categorization of site user so that you can kind of prepare the content for each type of user, and then you can kind of go through pages in your site in what area that you would like to change the content based on how you know the users.
Yeah, and I'd second that. I think that's spot on. It's just good website in general best practices to create some personas. And those personas are going to help you in just many different ways, not just in personalization, but really working to create those personas is critical. And as Chet said, you can use your analytics to do that. And I've covered that in previous webinars on how you can kind of get a little bit of idea on how to segment. But just to mention, you can take a look at which site sections are being visited and segment users based on that. But if you don't have access to that data, look at your own business goals about what you want people to do on the site. And I think in my example of pen expense app, we wanted people to sign up for our newsletter, and we wanted people to sign up for a free trial or become a customer. And once they did those things, we moved them down the buyer journey. So if you want someone to become a lead for your firm, start with that as a persona and think about the steps and the mental place that they would need to be in to become a lead. And then after they become a lead, create a new persona for them. So really look at your business goals and what you want to accomplish on your site, and that could be, in the absence of data, a good starting place for a persona.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think you always want to start with the why. Okay, well, thank you all for joining us and learning how Sitecore digital marketing systems can really change your marketing. I hope you learned as much as I did. I think sometimes a lot of webinars tend to get a little bit theoretical, and we wanted to make it a point to give you really tactical ideas and tactical outcomes today. So if you want, the recording for today's webinar will be available on our website within the next 3 business days, and we'll also be sharing the webcast URL with all of our attendees via email. In the meantime, you can feel free to reach out to us at contact@edynamic.net with any questions or if you want to follow up on any of the specifics that we talked about today. Thank you all for joining us, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, guys.